Were you the only cinematographer being considered for the job?
That only Todd can answer.
Yeah,
exactly. I've done the last 6 movies. This was our 6th film in 10, 11 years now. He brought the script to me quite early, but only Todd can answer.
Okay.
Like, was he, and listen, the filmmaker, the director and DP relationship is such a tight one. It's such an important one. We work so closely together. We argue sometimes. There's so many things that go into that relationship. Even myself, having directed, I recognize how important that relationship is. And I never take for granted the fact that I'm going to get another job with Todd simply because I got the last 4 or 5. I just always treat it like it's a new slate. It's a new movie. He has the complete prerogative and right to want to switch things up, choose somebody else, all of those things. Of course, I love working with him and I would do it forever. But it's I also recognize that, it's like an at-will thing in which I'm grateful every time I have the opportunity to do a movie with him. But I don't know. Listen, there are a lot of really good DPs, and I know Todd's fans of many of their work. We talk about the other DPs' work. So, yeah, that's Todd, I guess.
When did you and Todd Phillips first discuss Joker? Did he call you and say, I have this script?
Yeah, he called me basically. He talked to me a little bit about the idea. Like, I think I figured out this idea of like how we can make something that could be really cool, this character study, but we basically take a character from the from DC universe and make something that just feels wholly unique. Like, not necessarily not a comic book movie, really just like an old, what could have been made in the 70s, but it just happens to be a movie that's about somebody who ultimately is part of that universe. And I thought that was amazing. And that was before I read the script. That was probably, 6 months before I read the script or something like that. And then finally, once he sort of really worked it out with Scott and got to a place where it was like a draft in which he wanted to show me, that's when I first read it. But I had known about the idea for some months before that.
Where were you when you got the call?
I was actually working on Godzilla, King of the Monsters in Atlanta, and I was on my porch when Todd, it wasn't the call to say, hey, it was more of like, I sent you the script, have you read it yet? Let's talk about it. And so I had already read the script, and then, oh, actually, no, maybe I'm having it wrong. Maybe it was just a call that I was sitting on my porch, and he said, I've got the script, I'll send it to you soon, but I'd like you to shoot it. Do you want to shoot it? And so it was that. And I just was sitting on the porch with my wife and our daughter, I think at the time, who's like just been born in Atlanta. And I was like, yeah, man, I want to shoot this. So I think it was before I even read the script, for sure. Yeah.
What do you talk about in your first meeting with a director, especially a director that you know so well, that you've done many films with? How is that conversation different or the same as maybe other conversations with other directors when you first start a project?
Yeah, it's interesting. With Todd and I, our conversations were never like long-winded 5-6 hour meetings conversations. They're often like little conversations, or even sometimes just like 1 or 2 ideas thrown out over months and months and months. So they're never like really, sometimes we'll do an actual page turn, and we'll do it in small blocks where we actually turn through the page and take notes on sort of just ideas of like how we think we should shoot this. Are there any specific shots, any special pieces of equipment? Is this a scene that's handheld? Is it a scene that's long lens? Is it a scene that has a lot of camera movement? It's more of just what's the emotion of the scene and how do we translate that on screen? And so we'll do that probably later in prep once I'm, officially on the job and we have some time to break off. And we'll do that, as successfully as we can to get all the way through the script. Sometimes we don't get all the way through the script. Sometimes we just get through 30 or 40 pages, but it starts to inform the bigger picture of what the movie's going to be. Early conversations are really pretty short, It's like, I think our first conversation on Joker was literally about aspect ratio, about what format, like what aspect ratio we'd shoot it in. And we both wanted to shoot it in 1:8:5, which was great because we were in agreement. So that was pretty straightforward. It was like, feels 185. And I was like, yeah, feels 185. End of that conversation. And then it was like, we're definitely going to shoot film. Maybe we shoot large format, like 70 millimeter film. You know, we've loved those films. It felt like there was something about this movie. It's not Lawrence of Arabia in that sort of 70 millimeter way, but more like perhaps The Master in the way that P.T. Anderson shot large format there, in that it's a real character study. That was a bit of a two-hander between, Joaquin and what's his name? Great actor, Philip Seymour Hoffman, right? But nonetheless, it was an intimate story, but really a deep dive into the character and the minds of these human beings. And we thought, oh, that would be an interesting way to isolate this character in his environment, but allow us to sort of have this almost like true three-dimensional quality where we could really draw the audience into them by shooting large format. So we had that discussion early, and then we just talked about how just the vibe of it should feel handmade. Like it doesn't want to feel, even though it's a studio movie, and it just wants to feel very sort of constructed by human beings, and that it doesn't want to feel too polished and too clean and all these things. And then we would start to say things like, well, you know, it's a character study, and all those great 70s movies, which really were the decade in which you would see those character studies every weekend being released in the theaters, you know, whether it was, you know, obviously Taxi Driver or something like that, or King of Comedy, of course, those have some correlation, but also Serpico or Dog Day Afternoon or Straight Time or any of these movies that just felt singularly about somebody, Midnight Cowboy. And those vibes, not necessarily the look and feel of the movies per se, because we weren't really referencing them. Sometimes we'd reference them and think, oh, that's going to show us something about how the movie should look. And mostly we would come away from like looking at a scene or something out of those movies and go, it's not really the look of the movie. Like we would hope maybe, oh, we could look at that would be the template, and we could just copy that template as to like color or contrast or the look and feel. And it was always like, it's not really the movie. So a lot of it was a discovery of like what the movie isn't, to then figure out like what the movie wants to be. But certainly tone-wise, and the fact that those movies really were made by filmmakers that felt unencumbered by the studios, and they were out there just making these movies in an independent way, even though they were released by big studios. That's, I think, the vibe of what we talked about. And so those were the early conversations. And then, you know, you're having conversations every day when you location scout, right? Every time you see a location, even if it's not the right one, you discover things about the scene. You know, you have discussions about, oh, why is this not the right one? Oh, because I want him to be able to travel from here to here. And so you're discovering things all the time when you're in prep, mostly in location scouts, even though location scouts are arduous. And I remember Soderbergh, when he claimed he was going to retire, even though he like said, I'm retired, and then made 5 movies that year or something. Anyway, he, I think, had a quote or something where he's like, I just don't want to ever spend another day in a scout van, because they're just tiresome, right? Like to be in this van, traveling around, going in and out of like apartments and locations, and just, they can be tiring, and I understand why filmmakers hate them. But what's interesting about them is how informative they are to the look and feel of the movie, because you've got the production designer, you've got me, you've got Todd, you've got the producer. So every day you're basically having those discussions in ways that are sometimes, you know, a sentence here, a sentence there. So that's the real prep of a movie, as opposed to like what you would imagine are these like, you know, long 8-hour days of like sitting and talking about cerebrally about what the movie should be. It's not really that at all.
And also building that world, the feel of the sounds, not just the music. I'm talking about like the yelling out and this feeling of just total chaos. When he would go out into the city, and how sort of contentious it was. And I thought that was really well done with the yelling, like you'd hear.
Yeah, even like all this. I think the sound design in the movie is unbelievable. And yeah, I think the big thing that comes across obviously in the script, it was a big part of the story about what Todd was trying to do here was, you know, how hard and cold the city can be to individuals, right? The city en masse is just this like world of people sometimes striking out violently against each other. But really, you've got this like sort of lonely man in the middle who, at his heart, is actually quite gentle, and all he's trying to do is sort of continue to do his thing, and he's really just an individual that's you know, that I think it's an example of how society treats each other and the effects that it can have, particularly when we either treat each other without empathy and humanity, or we just look, you know, we have invisibility, you know, we just see past them and walk past them, and all those sort of big ideas as to how society treats each other. And I think that was a big part of it. And what better way to sort of expose that, but when Arthur is in that world, to show everyone around him, you know, as uncaring, effectively, or just like, what's the word? The word's more, you know, that the world, it's not even uncaring. It's like that they have no, you're just invisible. Like on the bus in the beginning, yes, the woman sort of is saying, you know, please don't bother my kid, but everyone else on the bus could care less, you know. Nobody's intervening, nobody's sort of coming to his defense, nobody's really cares, they're just trying to do their thing. So, you know, I think that's part of it.
Yeah, there was also the feeling of disdain that people had for him, that you started to, and then I don't know if that was how the laughter, something that seems disarming, then became this tool of like, or people looked at him with just this total disdain, like.
Yeah, I think it's like disdain and it's just insignificance, you know. I think we can recognize in Arthur and his struggle every day so many parts of ourselves. And, you know, it's the way you look past the homeless person, because you'd just rather not look at the person than confront the reality of their situation, or somebody who's suffering from madness or psychosis. Like, we see them all the time in our world. We see them on the streets. We walk past them. It's interesting. Like, I had somebody say the movie reminded them of that Woody Allen movie with Cate Blanchett that she won. Or she was certainly nominated. What was it?
Blue Jasmine?
Yeah, Blue Jasmine, right? And I thought, oh, it was really interesting because Blue Jasmine's like a origin story of a person speaking crazy to themselves on a bench, right? Like, that's ultimately who she ends up at the end of the movie. And it's like, Blue Jasmine's just an origin story of like how this woman got to be in that bench. And I thought, oh yeah, it's actually a pretty similar analogy. This is an origin story of how this man became the person he was, and like all the things that led to it. And I thought that was kind of a cool analogy.
And also too, there's a class issue, because isn't she in San Francisco? And so, having grown up there, I know, especially in the 80s, I know you've talked about this in other interviews, but at that time, a lot of mentally ill people were on the streets. And
yeah.
I would see that. And that's why I really picked up on the voices, because I would hear that a lot. As a child walking down the street in San Francisco, you would hear this yelling.
Yeah, and that movie dealt with class in another way, which was like, she came from money, but she was now going to a place of like losing it. And what does that feel like, right? Like, hey, she actually lived in both worlds, and she ends up just being that person that you sort of, you know, walk right past and don't think about. And she's got a whole story, right? And so this movie's no different, you know. It's a guy that, you know, you wonder, like, in the backstory of the people in the movie, like if that woman on the bus or the people on the bus, if this was like a real life story, would go, oh my God, the guy who just shot Murray Franklin, that's the same guy on the bus. Like, that you would even do that thing where suddenly, you know, you correlate one thing to another and say like, wow, I barely even noticed him, right? It's like that thing that we do all the time with people that strike out on society, and suddenly they're seen, but, you know, previously unseen. So.
Then the Santa Monica residents.
I would agree, 100%.
You hold the door for them, they thank you, you do that at Starbucks, and you get a look of like, I mean, it's just really interesting.
It's just, I think it's one of the powerful parts of this movie that I think has helped it break out. And frankly, it's something that I think I'm super proud of, is besides making something that is wholly just a piece of entertainment that can make money and all the things that the business of show business has to do, but as a piece of filmmaking and storytelling, that it can help just shine a light on some of those issues. I've had people in Q&As and other people who've said, they suffer from mental illness and it really spoke to them and it spoke very powerfully to them, and the fact that they feel invisible and they feel unseen and all of these things. And it's not that they feel that way and feel like they want to strike out against society the way Joker did. It's that they just feel suddenly like they understand, like they feel just a kinship with the story that we were telling. And so it's that, I think, is the most positive aspect of the success of the movie, is that it's touched people, in ways that I think we would hope for, but not necessarily expected.